She never amounted to much anyway. That's what my son said after skipping his sister's funeral. But what gutted me more wasn't just that he laughed while saying it, it's that he said it on speakerphone, and every cousin in that room heard it. I hadn't even finished locking up her casket photos before the whispers started, and while I was still shaking hands with mourners, Mark had already drained her scholarship fund and signed over her share of the estate, with forged paperwork. But what he didn't know, every original document was still locked in my father's old safe. He buried his own name, and I let him dig. My name is Frank Bennett, and I'm 75 years old. Every Sunday for 40 years I've polished the oak dinner table my father helped me build, even though these days it's usually just me sitting there. My daughter Elaine's crisp white nursing jacket still hangs on, the kitchen chair where she left it last month, the day before we lost her. My son Mark, a real estate mogul who traded warmth for wealth years ago, hasn't joined us for dinner in over a decade. The pine polish catches afternoon light while I organize another stack of property documents. Every deed, transfer and agreement filed in chronological order, originals secure in my father's old desk safe. Mark always sneered at my outdated record-keeping, but precision has its purpose. But let me start from the beginning. I spent 3 days getting every detail of Elaine's funeral just right. You'd think after 40 years of woodworking, my hands would stay steady arranging flowers, but they trembled positioning each soft blue hydrangea, her favorite since she was a little girl tending our garden boxes. The chapel coordinator kept offering help, but some things a father needs to do himself. The morning of the service, I arrived 2 hours early to check the sound system. Had to make sure they'd play Amazing Grace first, the version Elaine always hummed while sorting her medical charts. Even caught myself singing along during the test, my voice echoing off empty pews that would soon fill with mourners. And fill they did. By 10 o'clock, familiar faces crowded every row. The nurses from Elaine's ward came in their uniforms, badges still on from the night shift. Old Mrs. Peterson from next door brought her whole family. Even cousins I hadn't seen in years made the trip. But that one empty space in the front row, it bore down on me like a physical weight. You ever sit in a room full of people but your eyes keep drifting to the same empty chair? That's how it was with Mark's seat. Every time the door creaked, my head turned, hoping. But as the organ started playing, and the service began, that space stayed vacant, a hole in our family portrait that everyone could see. I maintained my composure through the eulogy, through the prayers, through watching them lower my little girl into the ground. Had to. She would have expected nothing less. My voice stayed level, thanking everyone for coming, shaking hands, accepting hugs. But I noticed how conversations went quiet when I passed by. Saw the sidelong glances, the way people's eyes skittered away from that empty chair. Such a shame, I heard Mrs. Peterson whisper to her daughter. His own sister's funeral. The vestibule filled with hushed voices and rustling programs. I focused on practical tasks, signing the chapel registry, carefully removing Elaine's photograph from its easel. There was a fingerprint on the glass. I took out my handkerchief and polished it away, remembering how she'd always tease me about my cleaning habits. "Dad, some smudges just show it's been loved," she'd say. I secured the registry in my briefcase, next to the folder of payment receipts. Everything in its place, everything documented, habits of a lifetime. "I'll call him tonight," I told Reverend Walsh when he asked about Mark. "Must have been an emergency." The words tasted like sawdust in my mouth. The sun was setting when I finally stepped outside, painting the chapel, walls that pale purple Elaine loved in springtime. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Mark's name lit up the screen. My thumb hesitated over the answer button, just for a moment. "Dad." His voice came through clear and sharp. Then he laughed, actually laughed. "Mark, where were you today?" My fingers tightened on the phone. "Oh, that." Another chuckle. "Dad, I wasn't wasting my time on her funeral. Let's be honest. She never amounted to much anyway." The laugh still echoed in my ear as Mark's words hit me like a physical blow. My workshop training kicked in. When something goes wrong, take a breath, steady yourself, check again. "Would you mind repeating that?" I kept my voice level, the way I would speaking to a difficult client. "Sure, Dad." Mark drew the words out slow like he was explaining something to a child. I said, "I wasn't wasting my time on her funeral. Elaine never amounted to much anyway." There was that edge of amusement again, as if he found the whole thing entertaining. The phone creaked in my grip, In 40 years of carpentry, I'd learned that when tools get too hot, you set them down before they break. I ended the call without another word, sliding the phone into my pocket where it felt like it was burning through the fabric. You know that silence that falls in a room right before a storm? That's what hit me, walking back into the fellowship hall. A dozen cousins huddled around tables, phones out, heads together. Conversations died mid-sentence as I entered. Eyes darted away, then back, heavy with something between pity and horror. Cousin Sarah approached first, her face tight. "Frank, Jerry and I were standing near you outside. The call was on speaker." She touched my arm gently. "Everyone's already hearing about it. I'm so sorry." The whispers were spreading like smoke through the room. His own sister said it wasn't worth his time, never amounted to much. Each echo of Mark's words made my jaw clench harder. I did what any craftsman does when emotions threaten to splinter the work. I focused on details. "Thank you all for coming," I said, making eye contact with each person still there. "I need to lock up now." My voice stayed steady, though my hands wanted to shake. The drive home felt longer than usual. I'd buckled Elaine's portrait into the passenger seat, couldn't bear to lay it flat in the trunk. The glass caught streetlight glare at every turn, like she was winking at me the way she used to when we shared an inside joke. Remember what I said about some habits being built into your bones? Soon as I got home, I headed straight for my office. Every receipt, every document from the service needed filing. A place for everything in its place. The routine would steady me, I thought. The filing cabinet drew open smooth on its rails. I'd just oiled them last month. Inside, everything was organized by colored tabs, just like Elaine had taught me when she helped set up my business records. "Color coding isn't just for nurses, Dad," she'd teased. I pulled out the folder marked Estate Planning, Children, and laid it on my desk. The tabs inside were arranged alphabetically. Elaine's share followed by Mark's share, then miscellaneous. But something felt off. You develop a sense for these things after decades of checking lumber for flaws. When something's not quite right, your gut knows before your eyes do. The Elaine's share section seemed thinner than I remembered. I flipped through the pages, counting notarized copies that should have been there. 3 were missing, documents I had drawn up just last year when we restructured the family trust. A chill crept up my spine that had nothing to do with the evening air. In woodworking, you learn to spot when someone's tampered with your tools. The same instinct was screaming now, looking at those missing papers. I glanced up at Elaine's portrait on the mantel. The last light of day caught her smile, that gentle look she always had when she knew something needed fixing but didn't want to cause a fuss. The desk safe was my father's pride, solid steel with a combination lock he'd taught me to spin by sound more than sight. I pulled it forward, feeling its reassuring weight. Inside, everything had its place in cream-colored envelopes, each one labeled in my careful block letters. You ever notice how some habits stick with you? My father drummed it into me. "Keep originals locked up tight, son. Papers can lie, but ink tells tales." I pulled out my inventory list, another habit Elaine had encouraged. "It's just like tracking medical supplies, Dad," she'd said. "You need to know what you have before you can know what's missing." My finger traced down the columns. Wills, codicils, beneficiary designations. Each one should have had its matching envelope. 3 were missing, just like the notarized copies. Something Mark had said last month niggled at my memory. He'd mentioned needing duplicates from the notary for some routine property paperwork. I'd thought nothing of it then. He'd been handling those matters for years, ever since his real estate business took off. Now that casual request felt different, like a loose board you don't notice until it shifts under your weight. I reached for my phone, scrolling to Susan Miller's number. She'd been our family's bank manager since before Mark graduated law school. The line rang twice before her precise voice answered. "Frank, is everything all right? I'm so sorry about Elaine." "Thanks, Susan. Listen, I need to check something. Could you look up any recent authorizations on the family accounts?" Papers rustled on her end. "Give me a moment to pull that up. Yes, there were several electronic authorizations last week. They moved assets into a holding company." She paused. "It's registered to Mark's office address." My stomach knotted. "When exactly?" More clicking. "Let me see. Tuesday evening at 8:47 p.m., Wednesday morning at 6:15 a.m., and Thursday afternoon at 2:30 p.m. Each timestamp hit like a hammer blow. Tuesday night, I'd been sitting by Elaine's hospital bed holding her hand while machines beeped. Wednesday morning, I'd gone home just long enough to shower. Thursday afternoon, I'd been meeting with the funeral home. Could you send me those statements, Susan, right now? Of course, her tone had shifted, becoming carefully neutral. I'm emailing them to you. Frank, do you want me to flag these transfers for review? Not yet. Let me handle this first. I kept my voice steady, though my hand had tightened on the phone. My printer hummed to life as Susan's email came through. I grabbed my yellow highlighter, the one Elaine had always teased me about using instead of those fancy computer marks. Old school works just fine, I'd tell her, making her laugh. The transfers stood out like footprints in fresh snow once I marked them. Each one had moved money through a series of accounts, ending in that holding company. But it was a memo line that made my breath catch. Consolidation under advisement. In 40 years of business, I'd never used that phrase. That was lawyer speak, Mark's language. I checked my watch. Just past 7 in the evening. I punched in Mark's number, surprising myself with how calm I felt. Maybe it's like when you find rot in a support beam. The shock comes later. First, you just focus on what needs doing. Dad? He sounded distracted. Probably still at his office. He always worked late. We need to meet. Tomorrow morning, your office. I'm pretty booked. 9 a.m., Mark. That glass conference room you're so proud of. I didn't wait for his response. I'll be there. After hanging up, I gathered the highlighted statements into a red folder. Another habit from Dad. Red means review, he'd always said. And review means respect what you find, not what you hope to find. I set my alarm for 7, early enough to review everything one more time before the meeting. Sitting back in my chair, I couldn't shake the question that kept circling. What else had Mark moved while I was watching my daughter slip away? Mark's office building was all glass and steel, jutting up against the morning sky like some giant's crystal collection. You know the type, where even the potted plants look expensive and the elevator music sounds imported. The kind of place that makes you feel small just walking in. The security guard checked my ID twice before letting me up to the 20th floor. Guess a man in work boots and a clean flannel shirt didn't fit their usual visitor profile. Not that I cared. I'd been working with my hands since before this building was even a blueprint. Mark's assistant, some young woman with perfect nails and a smile that never reached her eyes, led me to the conference room. The whole back wall was glass, showing off the river below where barges crawled along like water bugs. Must have cost a fortune, that view. I wondered how many of those dollars had been mine. I set my red folder down just as Mark strode in, wearing one of those suits that probably cost more than my first truck. Dad, he said, like we were meeting for coffee instead of whatever this was. You're looking well. Cut the small talk, Mark. My voice came out gravelly. Hadn't slept much. He settled into his chair, reached into his briefcase, and pulled out a stack of papers twice as thick as mine. I assume you're here about the estate reorganization. That smirk of his appeared, the one that always reminded me of a cat that found the cream. Reorganization? The word tasted bitter. That what you call stealing your sister's share while she was dying? Here. He slid the contracts across the polished table. Everything's perfectly legal. You authorized expedited consolidation of assets last month. See? Right there. Your signature. I pulled the pages closer, adjusting my reading glasses. The signature looked like mine at first glance, but there was something off about it. That little curl at the end of the B, I'd never made that stroke in my life. These dates. I tapped the paper. This one's from the night Elaine's heart stopped the first time. This one's from when they were putting in the ventilator. My finger moved down the list. And this? This was during her funeral arrangements. Mark shrugged, straightening his platinum cufflinks. Efficient stewardship of family resources. The estate needed streamlining. And the memorial fund? My throat tightened around the words. The money for her nursing scholarship. He flipped to another page, sliding it forward with one manicured finger. Reallocated to growth opportunities. His tone was so casual he might have been discussing the weather. The account's been zeroed out. Better return on handvestment this way. Heat crept up my neck as the truth sank in. While I'd been holding my daughter's hand, watching monitors tick away her final hours, my son had been dismantling everything I'd built, everything I'd meant to leave behind. You've got two choices here, Dad. Mark leaned back, tenting his fingers. You can accept that I'm managing things now, or you can try fighting it in court. But ask yourself, do you really want to spend your retirement money on lawyers at your age? The humiliation burned worse than any workshop accident I'd ever had. This was my son, my own blood, treating me like some senile old fool who needed managing. Stop playing hero, Mark said as I gathered up both sets of papers. It doesn't suit you anymore. I walked out without another word. In the hallway, I had to grip the rail until my hand stopped shaking. The morning sun through those fancy windows felt cold now, like winter light on bare branches. I need help, I whispered to nobody in particular. Then I pulled out my phone and scrolled through contacts until I found the one name I needed. Carl Peterson, my fishing buddy for 30 years, retired attorney, and the stubbornest man I knew besides myself. I hit the call button before doubt could stop me. The Lakeview Diner hadn't changed since they built it back in '82. Same green, vinyl booths, same coffee-stained counter, same neon sign flickering against the pre-dawn dark. Used to be, this was where Elaine and I would grab breakfast before her early shifts at the hospital. Now, it was just me and Carl, watching steam rise from cups black as the water outside. Thanks for meeting so early, I said, sliding the red folder across to him. Didn't want to risk running into anyone we know. Carl nodded, those careful eyes of his taking in every detail as he opened the folder. He had that lawyer's way of reading, methodical like a man searching for studs behind drywall. Never missed a thing, Carl. Start from the beginning, he said, not looking up from the papers. Everything. So I did. Told him about the funeral first, how Mark hadn't shown, about that phone call afterward, Mark's voice dripping with contempt as he dismissed his sister's service as a waste of time. Carl's jaw tightened at that. He'd known Elaine since she was knee-high. Then I found these. I tapped the contracts. Transfers, reallocations, consolidations, all with signatures that look like mine but aren't. Dates line up perfect with when I was at the hospital with Elaine. Carl pulled out his reading glasses, examining each page like he was looking for hidden messages. His brow furrowed deeper with every document. See this language here? He pointed to a clause. Pursuant to immediate necessity. And here, expedited consolidation under advisement. Your son's firm uses these phrases in their commercial contracts. I've seen them before. He looked up at me. But you wouldn't know that kind of corporate speak, would you? Hell no. I say what I mean, plain and simple. And these notary stamps? Carl held one page up to the dim light. The pressure marks are different on some, like they were copied, not pressed. He set the paper down with a grim smile. Arrogance leaves fingerprints, Frank. Your son got sloppy. Something steady kindled in my chest at those words. First spark of hope I'd felt since that funeral call. We need bank records, Carl said, checking his watch. Susan Miller still managed the downtown branch? 20 minutes later, we were sitting in Susan's office while she pulled up transaction histories. Her fingers moved quick over the keyboard, glasses reflecting strings of numbers. Here's the transfer chain, she said, turning her monitor so we could see. Multiple movements, all terminating in accounts controlled by Mark's holding company. She started printing, each page marked with the bank's certified stamp. The memorial fund was liquidated in 3 steps, disguised as operational expenses. My throat felt tight watching those papers. Stack up, evidence, proof, but also a record of betrayal that made my skin crawl. Susan, I said quietly, I appreciate this, but you know how this looks, right? Me going after Mark. I rubbed my face. Hell, he was just in City Business Monthly again. 40 under 40. Picture of him shaking the mayor's hand. Frank. Carl's voice had that steady tone he used when landing big fish. You're thinking about neighbors reading headlines about a father suing his son, about whispers at church and the grocery store. He waited until I met his eyes. But there's more than one way to skin a cat, legally speaking. You're saying there's a path that doesn't end in a public brawl. I'm saying there's a path that follows the law and still stings plenty. He pulled out his phone. Let me schedule a document review for this afternoon. I've got some ideas about those notary stamps. For the first time since Mark's call at the funeral, I could take a full breath. Then my own phone buzzed, a calendar alert I'd forgotten about. The tension rushed back as I read the notification. Family Foundation Quarterly Meeting, tomorrow 9 a.m., Mark Bennett presenting. The coffee in my stomach turned to acid. Frank? Carl was watching me. What is it? I turned my phone so he could see. His eyebrows rose slightly as he read. Then that familiar, strategic look crossed his face, the one that meant he was already 3 moves ahead. Back at my house, Carl and I cleared the dining room table, the same one where we'd all shared Sunday dinners when the kids were young. Now it was covered with papers instead of plates, each document marked with little yellow sticky notes poking out like accusatory fingers. Probate court's already scheduled, Carl said, tapping his laptop. 60 days from today. He glanced at me over his reading glasses. That's not much time, Frank. My stomach dropped. 2 months. Might as well have been 2 minutes with everything we needed to prove. You remember that maple grandfather clock your dad left you? Carl asked, nodding toward the hallway where it still kept perfect time. Think of this like that. Every tick matters, but rush the repair and you'll mess up the works. I smiled despite myself. Carl knew I'd spent 3 months restoring that clock, cleaning each gear by hand. Point taken, where do we start? First, call that notary's office. We need to verify when these signatures actually happened. I dialed the number while Carl spread out the contracts, arranging them by date. A young woman answered, Jenny, according to her cheerful greeting. Yes, I'm checking on some documents that were notarized last month, I said, reading off the dates. Could you confirm the appointment times? Let me pull up the log. Keys clicked in the background. That's strange. We don't show any appointments on those dates. We were closed that week for training. My hand tightened on the phone. Could you email me a certified copy of your appointment log? Of course, where should I send it? After hanging up, I watched Carl draft what he called a preservation letter, legal language demanding Mark's office keep all their digital records intact. No deleted emails, no wiped hard drives. Now, Carl said, pushing a legal pad toward me, let's work on your testimony. Simple, straight facts. Tell me about finding those first missing documents. I started talking while Carl recorded on his phone, describing how I'd discovered the gaps in my files. He'd stop me sometimes, helping smooth out the rough edges without losing the truth of it. Good, he said after the 3rd run-through. You're not playing for sympathy, just laying out facts. The emotion comes through on its own. We spent the next hour labeling bankers' boxes, creating an evidence trail clear enough for anyone to follow. Each document found its proper place. Bank statements here, contracts there, notary logs in their own folder. Remember, Carl said, watching me organize, we're building a foundation that can hold up. In court, every paper matters. The doorbell rang, Susan from the bank, right on time. She carried a thick envelope sealed with the bank's official stamp. Here's everything you asked for, she said, laying out account statements. I've certified the memorial fund's balance before the transfers began. She pointed to a highlighted line. $112,000, all designated for the nursing scholarship in Elaine's name. I had to look away for a moment, remembering how proud Elaine had been when we'd set up that fund. She'd wanted to help other nurses the way someone had once helped her. Thank you, Susan, I managed. I know this puts you in an awkward position. She straightened her glasses. Numbers don't lie, Mr. Bennett. They tell their own story. After she left, my email pinged. Mark's name appeared in bold in my inbox, subject line reading, Friendly Family Advice. Carl watched as I clicked it open. Dad, pushing this will only embarrass you. I've got 3 law firms on retainer and enough documentation to tie this up for years. Back off now, and we'll call it a senior moment. Push harder, and I'll make sure everyone knows exactly how unstable you've become since Elaine died. Your loving son, Mark. Carl read over my shoulder, his reflection in the monitor growing stormy. Well, he said quietly, looks like your son just handed us Exhibit A for emotional manipulation. I saved the email, then added it to our growing file. The grandfather clock chimed in the hallway, marking another hour gone. 60 days suddenly felt very short indeed. I hit print on Mark's email, watching each line emerge like a confession. The way he phrased it, let the professionals handle things, reminded me of how he'd talked down to his mother when she questioned his business decisions. Same tone, same arrogance. We need to move, Carl said, checking his watch. The notary closes at 5. The notary's office sat in one of those old downtown buildings with brass elevator buttons and oak-paneled walls. Jenny, the assistant who'd helped on the phone, recognized my voice right away. Her supervisor, Ms. Torres, joined us in the conference room, bringing a laptop and several thick logbooks. Everything's time-stamped, Ms. Torres explained, opening her scheduling software. Carl guided the conversation, professional but firm. Could you show us the appointment logs for these specific dates? He pointed to the contracts in question. Ms. Torres typed, then turned the screen our way. As Jenny mentioned, we were closed that whole week, annual compliance training in Phoenix. She pulled up flight confirmations, hotel receipts. Our entire staff was out of state. My hands stayed steady as I photographed each screen, each log entry. Carl had me sign an affidavit right there, Ms. Torres adding her own sworn statement about the office closure. Back home, I spread everything across my desk. Hospital parking stubs, time-stamped photos of me beside Elaine's bed, nurses' notes showing my presence during rounds. I built a timeline hour by hour, proving what any father would know. I'd been holding my daughter's hand, not signing away her legacy. The sun had set by the time I finished. I found myself in Elaine's room, still kept exactly as she'd left it. Her nursing jacket hung on the door hook, the sleeve worn smooth where she'd push it up before washing her hands. The room smelled faintly of the lavender sachets she'd loved. I don't know if I can do this, I admitted, when Carl checked in. My voice sounded older than usual in the quiet room. Taking my own son to court. People will talk. Carl settled into Elaine's reading chair. Let me ask you something, Frank. When you taught your kids about right and wrong, did you worry what the neighbors thought? Course not. Dignity isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about telling the truth under oath even when it hurts. Even when it's your own blood you're telling it about. I ran my fingers along the jacket sleeve, remembering how proud Elaine had looked at her nursing school graduation. She deserved better than this. Then let's make sure she gets it. My computer chimed from the office. Another email alert. I found Carl's reading glasses and handed them over as he scanned the message. Well, he said grimly, looks like Mark's not waiting around. He's queued up 3 more transfers to execute before the hearing, moving everything he can reach into offshore accounts. I felt something shift inside me, like a gear finally catching. All these years I'd taught my children that actions had consequences. Time to prove I meant it. Carl slid a document across the desk. Emergency motion to freeze assets. Judge Williams takes early filings at 7 a.m. He tapped the signature line. Your call, Frank. I picked up my father's old fountain pen, the one I'd used to sign both my children's birth certificates. The ink flowed smooth and black against the paper. 7 a.m., I said, capping the pen. I'll bring coffee. The duty judge's chambers felt smaller than I'd expected. Just a desk, law books, and city lights still glowing through the window at dawn. Judge Martinez had the kind of face that gave away nothing, reading through our emergency motion with steady eyes behind rimless glasses. Mr. Patterson, she said, looking up at Carl, walk me through the immediate concern. Carl stepped forward. Your Honor, we have documented evidence of unauthorized transfers accelerating ahead of the main hearing. Our bank officer, he gestured to Susan Miller, who sat perfectly straight in her charcoal suit, is prepared to testify to the pattern and destination accounts. I watched Susan hand over her sworn statement, complete with transaction logs highlighted in careful yellow strips. My throat tightened. Seeing the numbers, Elaine's memorial fund, my retirement accounts, even the college savings I'd set aside for her future children, all of it flowing toward Mark's web of holdings like water down a drain. You know that moment when you realize how much trust you've given away? How blind you've been. I felt it right there in those chambers, sharp as a splinter under the skin. Judge Martinez studied the exhibits, her finger tracing dates and amounts. These signatures, she said finally. You're prepared to testify they're not yours, Mr. Bennett? Yes, Your Honor. My voice came out steady. I was at the hospital with my daughter during every supposed signing date. We have the visitor logs, parking receipts, nurses' notes, all certified. She nodded, then picked up her pen. I'm granting a temporary freeze on the listed accounts pending full hearing. Mr. Patterson, prepare the order. Ms. Miller, please ensure your institution complies immediately. Walking out, I felt like I could breathe again, not easily, but enough. Carl clapped my shoulder as we hit the parking lot. First round to us, he said. Now the real work starts. We turned my dining room into a war room over the next weeks. Bankers' boxes lined the walls, each one labeled and indexed. Carl taught me how to organize exhibits, how to answer questions directly without volunteering extra information, how to keep my voice level even when discussing painful moments. The funeral call, he'd say, timing my response. Tell it clean, no commentary. I'd practice. My son called after the service. He said attending would be a waste of time, that my daughter never amounted to much. I asked him to repeat himself. He did, slower this time. I ended the call. Good, Carl would nod. Just the facts. Let them speak for themselves. Some nights I'd wake at 3 a.m., mentally walking through cross-examination. What would Mark's lawyers ask? How would I handle seeing my son across that courtroom? The calendar on my phone showed the days ticking down. 30, then 25, then 15. Susan Miller came by twice more, helping us trace every transfer through the bank's systems. She had this careful way of explaining things, making sure I understood each step. So your son's pattern was consistent, she told me, spreading out another batch of records. Always moving funds on days he knew you'd be distracted. Always using that same consolidation language you never use. The night before court, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting a navy tie that had seen every important moment of my adult life. Wedding, children's graduations, my wife's funeral. The blazer still fit well enough, though the shoulders carried more years than when I'd bought it. I walked through the quiet house one last time, checking exhibits, straightening papers. In the living room, I picked up Elaine's photograph, her last Christmas with us, smiling in her favorite sweater. The glass had gathered a bit of dust. I polished it carefully with my handkerchief and set it by the front door where I'd see it in the morning. The leather briefcase, a gift from my father when I'd started my business, sat ready by my desk, the red folder centered inside. I set 2 alarms, knowing sleep would be thin anyway. Dawn came quick and grey. I knotted my tie, checked my pocket for reading glasses, made sure every document was in place. The photo caught morning light as I passed. Elaine's smile steady and sure. Time to face the courthouse steps. The courtroom wood creaked under my steps as I approached the witness stand. Funny, how a room you've walked into calmly can suddenly feel like it's tilting sideways, isn't it? I caught the edge of the railing, steadied myself, and raised my right hand. Carl started gentle, laying the foundation. Please state your name for the record. Franklin James Bennett. My voice carried better than I'd expected. And your relationship to Mark Bennett? He's my son. Simple truth, though it felt like gravel in my mouth. We walked through the timeline. Elaine's illness, the hospital vigils, the funeral Mark hadn't bothered to attend. Carl held up the first contract, dated during one of those ICU nights. Mr. Bennett, is this your signature on the transfer authorization? I leaned forward, adjusting my reading glasses. No, it's close, but see that loop on the B? I've never made that stroke in my life. And where were you when this document was allegedly signed? I pulled out my stack of hospital parking receipts, each one time-stamped. 7th floor ICU, sitting with my daughter. Didn't leave her room for 19 hours that day. Mark's lawyer, tall fellow with an aggressive tie, tried interrupting, but Judge Martinez waved him quiet. Carl continued methodically through each document, matching my hospital records against the supposed signing dates. With every overlay, I saw Mark's smile tighten just a bit more. Let's discuss the memorial fund, Carl said, sliding another exhibit forward. What was its intended purpose? To establish a nursing scholarship in Elaine's name. She spent 15 years caring for others, wanted that to continue somehow. And the fund's status now? Zeroed out. I had to pause, steadying my voice. Transferred to what the paperwork calls growth allocation under Mark's company. Susan Miller took the stand after me, her testimony precise as a surgical instrument. She walked through the transfer patterns, the timestamp trails, the repeated use of that consolidation language I'd never once used in 30 years of banking. And these electronic authorizations, Carl asked her, did they follow standard security protocols? No. Susan adjusted her glasses. The login patterns show access from Mr. Mark Bennett's office IP address, not his father's home computer or own devices. I watched Mark's face as she spoke. That confident smirk he'd worn since breakfast started cracking at the edges. His lawyer tried the usual tactics, suggesting memory lapses, implying family confusion, hinting at emotional decisions. But Carl had built our case on things that couldn't blink. Timestamps, parking receipts, digital trails preserved by court order. Your Honor, Carl said, I draw your attention to Exhibit 47. The notary logs. He placed them on the projector. Note the claimed signing dates. Now compare the hospital visitor logs in Exhibit 48. Mr. Bennett couldn't have been in two places at once. The judge leaned forward, studying the overlaid documents. The timestamps are problematic, she said carefully. When Mark's lawyer tried suggesting alternative explanations, Judge Martinez cut him short. Counselor, these records are certified. Are you challenging their authenticity? He backed down quick. Smart move. You don't want to accuse a bank of falsifying records without ironclad proof. The morning wore on, exhibit by exhibit, timeline by timeline. I could feel the room's atmosphere shifting, like weather changing before a storm. Even the court reporter's fingers seemed to hit her keys harder, each click another nail in the coffin of Mark's scheme. Just before lunch break, I caught Mark's eye across the courtroom. For the first time since this started, I saw what I'd been waiting for, that flicker of doubt, quick as a spark, but unmistakable. He looked away first. The court will recess for lunch, Judge Martinez announced. We'll reconvene at 1:30. I stood up on shaky legs, gripping my briefcase handle like it was the only solid thing in the room. Carl steadied my elbow as we walked out. Doing fine, he murmured, just like we practiced. I nodded, not trusting my voice just then. We'd barely reached the hallway when I heard the bailiff's boots behind us, that distinctive clip of authority on marble. Court's reconvening early, he called out. Judge wants all parties back inside. Back in the courtroom, Carl called our next witness, Dr. Sarah Chen, forensic document examiner. She'd spent 20 years analyzing signatures for the FBI before going private. You could tell she knew her stuff just from how she arranged her exhibits. Precise, methodical, like a surgeon laying out instruments. Dr. Chen, Carl began, could you explain your analysis of the signatures in question? She pointed to the projection screen where two signatures floated side by side, one from my driver's license, one from Mark's contracts. The questioned signatures show characteristics consistent with simulation, she said, using a laser pointer. Notice the pen lifts here and here. Natural signatures flow continuously. These show hesitation marks typical of careful copying. I watched Mark's jaw tighten as she continued. A reporter in the second row was writing so fast, his pen looked ready to catch fire. Moreover, Dr. Chen added, the pressure patterns are remarkably consistent across multiple signatures. Authentic signatures vary naturally in pressure. These show identical indentation patterns, suggesting they were traced or practiced repeatedly. She walked the court through microscopic details I'd never have noticed. Pen angle consistencies, spacing regularities, the lack of natural tremor in the strokes. Terms like characteristic deviation and baseline alignment filled the air, while Mark's lawyer shuffled papers with increasing urgency. When he cross-examined me again, he tried painting me as a forgetful old man who'd simply forgotten signing. Isn't it possible, Mr. Bennett, that these transactions simply slipped your mind? At your age? Objection, Carl cut in. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Martinez said sharply. I kept my voice steady. The receipts don't forget. The visitor logs don't forget. The computer timestamps don't forget. I was at the hospital with my daughter. The judge turned her attention to the holding company, structure peppering Mark's lawyer with questions about transfer timing and authority chains. His answers got increasingly tangled as she pressed on documentation gaps. I noticed phones lighting up around the gallery, screens tilting to show breaking news alerts. A courthouse reporter slipped out, already talking quietly into her phone. The local paper's website must have posted an update. Mark's attorney asked for a brief recess to discuss resolution options with his client. I watched Mark shake his head sharply, whispering something that made his lawyer's shoulders stiffen. Your Honor, the lawyer said, we may need additional time to... The court has heard sufficient evidence, Judge Martinez interrupted. I will review the exhibits overnight and deliver my ruling tomorrow morning at 9. She fixed Mark with a long look. I strongly suggest all parties consider their positions carefully before we reconvene. As we gathered our papers, Carl leaned close. Side door, he murmured. There are cameras out front. We slipped through the auxiliary exit, but I still caught glimpses of news vans through the tinted windows. Tomorrow's headlines were already writing themselves in my mind. Carl patted my shoulder as we reached the parking garage. Get some rest, he said. Tomorrow comes early. I nodded, too drained for words. The weight of the day, the testimonies, the evidence, the silent war of stares across the courtroom settled over me like a heavy blanket. I drove home through the gathering dusk, wondering what the morning papers would say. The house felt emptier than usual that night. I hung my jacket carefully, smoothing the wrinkles from the day's battles. Elaine's photo watched from the mantel as I sank into my chair, finally letting my hands shake, like they'd wanted to all afternoon. The local news would be starting soon. I left the TV dark, better to face whatever was coming after a night's sleep. I set my alarm for dawn and tried not to think about cameras waiting at the courthouse steps. My phone buzzed, a message from Carl. "First light, coffee first, then we face the music." I typed back "Roger that" and closed my eyes, letting the quiet wrap around me. In a few hours, the newspapers would roll, and there'd be no turning back. But for now, in the stillness, I could breathe. 9 o'clock sharp. You could have heard a pin drop in that courtroom as Judge Martinez settled into her chair. My hands were steady, but my chest felt tight as a drum. Carl gave me a slight nod, the kind that says, "Whatever comes, we're ready." After careful review of testimony and evidence, Judge Martinez began, "This court finds clear and convincing proof of unauthorized transfers and forged documentation." She looked directly at Mark, who sat rigid in his expensive suit. The expert testimony regarding signature simulation was particularly compelling, supported by both forensic analysis and contemporaneous records establishing the physical impossibility of Mr. Frank Bennett's presence at claimed signing locations. I remembered those hospital nights by Elaine's bed, holding her hand while machines beeped their steady rhythm. The thought that Mark had used those sacred hours to forge papers made my jaw clench. Furthermore, the judge continued, the pattern of transfers reveals a systematic effort to circumvent established estate provisions, constituting a severe breach of fiduciary duty. She lifted a document. The court hereby orders an immediate freeze of all assets controlled by Mark Bennett and his associated entities, pending comprehensive forensic accounting. A wave of whispers swept the gallery. Mark's face went pale, then red. Additionally, given the scope of potentially compromised assets, I am appointing receiver Thomas Reynolds to assume temporary control of all business operations and accounts tied to Bennett Real Estate Holdings. That's when I saw it. The exact moment Mark's carefully built facade cracked. His lawyer whispered something urgent, but Mark just stared straight ahead, like a man watching his ship sink. The court will retain jurisdiction to oversee the receiver's work and ensure proper restoration of misappropriated assets. Judge Martinez gathered her papers. "We're adjourned." The gallery erupted in hushed conversations. I caught fragments. Biggest real estate scandal since Baum, and his own father's signature. Outside, cameras clustered thick as summer flies. Through the courthouse's glass doors, I saw reporters doing stand-ups. Breaking news in the Bennett family scandal. Carl guided me toward a side exit, but not before I glimpsed the TV caption, "Real estate star under investigation." My phone started buzzing. Messages from cousins, old friends, even Mark's former mother-in-law. "Frank, we had no idea. So, sorry you had to go through this. Can't believe he would..." I switched it to silent. Those messages could wait. Carl found us a quiet spot down a back hallway away from the circus. He pulled out a leather folder and spread papers on a wooden bench. "Ready to do something good?" he asked. The trust documents were already drafted. Clean and simple, just like Elaine would have wanted. The Elaine Bennett Nursing Scholarship Fund would support one student each year, focusing on candidates who showed her same dedication to patient care. My pen felt heavy as I signed, not with doubt, but with the weight of getting things right. This signature, unlike the ones that had brought us to court, carried the full measure of truth in every stroke. "The first scholarship can be awarded next fall semester," Carl said, sorting copies. "Selection committees already lined up through the hospital's education department." I nodded, thinking of Elaine's steady hands checking IVs, adjusting pillows, bringing comfort to folks at their lowest moments. This was how her name should live on. When we finished the paperwork, I stepped outside. The winter sun hit clean and bright, making me squint. The air had that crisp December feeling that always reminded me of Elaine's love for Christmas morning coffee on the porch, watching cardinals at the feeder. "I've got one more stop," I told Carl, who was heading back to file our trust documents. The lumberyard was quiet this time of day. Bobby, who'd known me 30 years, helped me pick through the red oak boards. We found 3 pieces with grain that flowed like water, perfect for what I had in mind. "Building something special?" he asked, helping me load them in my truck. "Memorial bench," I said, "for my daughter's grave." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "On the house, Frank." I tried to argue, but he waved me off. Some things matter more than money. Driving home with those boards secured in the bed, I felt lighter than I had in months. Tomorrow I'd visit Elaine with something more substantial than flowers, something crafted by the hands that had taught her to sand her first woodworking project all those years ago. The sun was just a pale promise in the east when I loaded the bench into my pickup. 3 coats of satin finish made the red oak glow like honey, even in the dim light of dawn. I'd worked late into the night getting those brass fittings just right, the kind of precision work that keeps your mind focused when sleep won't come. My phone buzzed while I secured the tie-downs. The morning's headlines scrolled past. Bennett Real Estate Holdings, assets frozen in wake of court order. Major development partners distance themselves from Bennett Empire. Sources say multiple investors. Exploring legal options. You ever notice how quickly people scatter when the tide turns? Mark's carefully cultivated business circle was doing just that, first with whispers, then with press releases carefully worded by their legal teams. The empire he'd built on handshakes and corner-cutting was crumbling faster than yesterday's coffee cake. I pushed the phone into my pocket. Those headlines could wait. This morning wasn't about Mark's fall. It was about Elaine's legacy rising. The cemetery was empty, except for a groundskeeper in the distance, his rake making soft scratching sounds against the frost-touched grass. I'd already laid the pavers last week, making sure they were perfectly level. The bench deserved a proper foundation. Getting it positioned took some doing. 75-year-old backs aren't what they used to be. But I'd built this piece to last, not to be light. The brass plate sat cool in my pocket, waiting for its permanent home. You know that feeling when you're setting the final piece of a project and everything just fits? That's how it felt, mounting that plate. I'd carved the recess exactly right, so the edges met flush with the wood. My chisel had cut each letter clean and deep. Elaine Bennett, nursing scholarship. In service to others lies our highest calling. Below the plate, I'd built in a small, weatherproof compartment. The trust confirmation went inside, protected but visible through a clear panel. Anyone who sat here could read about the scholarship, how it would help nursing students who showed Elaine's same dedication to patient care, how her name would be tied to healing and hope, not to courtroom drama. The morning light was spreading now, catching the brass and making those carved letters shine. I sat down, feeling the solid support of good woodwork true. The view was just what I'd planned. You could see her name on the stone, and beyond it, the oak trees she'd always loved. Funny how the right kind of quiet can fill your chest up. I breathed it in, letting my hand rest on the armrest I'd shaped to follow the natural grain. The scholarship funds were secured. The papers were filed. Everything was set right and proper, ready to carry her kindness forward through the years. Remember how I mentioned my father teaching me about loyalty and honor? Well, he also taught me that true craftsmanship speaks for itself. You don't need to brag about solid work, it stands on its own merit. Just like this bench would stand, offering rest to visitors and telling Elaine's story long after I'm gone. Standing up, I ran my hand along the backrest one last time, feeling the smoothness only multiple sandings can achieve. The silence felt right, respectful, like a well-made joint that needs no nails to hold true. Looking at that bench, with the morning sun warming its finish, I saw more than just wood and brass. I saw everything rebuilt, dignity restored, justice served, legacy secured. The words came soft but certain, earned through every step of this long road. Respect is earned, not inherited.